If there hadn't been a Thomas Drake, there couldn't have been an Edward Snowden.
Hello, everyone. I'm incredibly excited and honored to be speaking with a true American hero, NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake.
Here we had a guy who did absolutely everything right. He placed his faith in the system. He saw, the warrantless wiretapping of hundreds of millions of Americans. He saw corruption. He brought it to the IG. He brought it to the Congress. And rather than protecting him against retaliation, they actively retaliated against him in the most public and aggressive way.
Framed, labeled an enemy of the state, and threatened with life in prison. That's what happened to Tom when he blew the whistle on the fraud, waste, and abuse of the government's illegal warrantless surveillance program. We all know about Edward Snowden, but according to Edward Snowden himself, if there hadn't been a Thomas Drake, there couldn't have been an Edward Snowden. All right. Tom, thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So I thought you'd be just a great person to comment on the recent confirmation hearing with Tulsi Gabbard for the DNI position, Director of National Intelligence, because, she got grilled a lot for her support of Edward Snowden. And I'm still amazed that people don't know your story, because it kind of, you hear, oh, Snowden should have gone up the chain of command. Oh, he should have gone through the proper channels. But you showed what happens when you do that. And I'm going to have you chime in a little bit as we get into this clip from the hearing.
First, until you are nominated by the president to be the DNI, you consistently praise the actions of Edward Snowden. Some who, I believe, jeopardized the security of our nation, and then, in an effort to flaunt that, fled to Russia.
All right, thoughts on that already?
He didn't flee to Russia. That's the first thing.
So what's the real story then?
That was a waypoint. He would never intended on that being the terminal destination. Nor was he planning on seeking asylum. He ended up stuck there because the United States conveniently revoked his passport, so he couldn't go any further.
Yeah, I believe an Obama official, Ben Rhodes, I think, bragged about that in his book, that they revoked his passport and he got stuck in Russia.
Yeah, it's really convenient because it does, in fact, support the narrative that he went to Russia. That was like his whole purpose. No, he knew what the risks were. I mean, it was dangerous enough just leaving Hong Kong, going through Russia, and not flying over airspace where he could be forced down or have the flight path altered. He was actually headed to South America. Yeah. They know there was actually seats reserved on plane was flying out to the Americas, not United States of America.
And didn't the U.S., did they down a plane like that they thought Snowden was on going to Ecuador?
That was Morales. Yeah, his actual, remember, forget diplomatic immunity. They completely violated the Vienna Convention. They literally forced him. They precluded him from landing rights. He was forced to land in Austria, and they boarded the plane. This was kind of like a weird version of Han Solo, the Millennium Falcon. So the Empire boards the plane, right? Very convenient, because they actually thought that he was escaping under diplomatic cover as a quote unquote international fugitive wanted by the United States. That was completely untrue. That's how hyper paranoid they were, and how far they were willing to go, including violating actual international law and customs.
No, I mean, I'm trying to understand, explain to me. So he was planning to go to Latin America.
Yes.
Now, but
yes.
Not on this flight?
No, there was not on that flight. No,
that was
not on the diplomatic flight.
That
was a narrative that the government is like, oh no, this was like, it was all arranged. Morales would fly into Moscow, and then they would just, spirit him out, as it were. That's not true at all. He actually had commercial He did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe it was via Cuba. It's I don't have all the details in terms of but there was a picture at one point taken of the two seats because there was someone. See, people that came out there. Oh, we're going to be there with him as he leaves. But that's before. That's why he ended up, in the transit zone for all those many weeks. He was stuck.
Yeah.
Putin didn't want him either because he didn't want him. Why would he want a whistleblower?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Oliver Stone's gone to Russia, and yeah, Putin, he is not a fan of whistleblowers. I mean, if
Not
you
at all.
think about Russia.
Yeah. But remember also, Russia is one of the few countries that does not, this is the other part of all this. How do you, huge risk even going through Russia, right? Huge risk. There was the risk of, like, as we realized later, what happened in Morales' plane. Russia is one of the few countries that does not have an extradition treaty with the United States.
Yeah.
They trade, as we know, right?
Yeah.
Exchanges do take place. So where do you go? I already hear with all this aside, right? All of it, a lot of the smoke and mirrors, right? So you had the smog, right, of just secrecy and national security and politics and just world affairs between quote unquote superpowers. He is safer still, I mean, in Russia than just about anywhere else. And remember, there were attempts. Multiple attempts, even while he was in the transit zone, to find a way to get to a different country. The problem was with this was the problem with a revoked passport. How do you then make your way when you no longer have proper papers? And there was a number of countries that were willing to actually accept him, but it got all obviously hung up in the travel area, right? With not having an active passport. So extremely convenient for the US.
Yeah. I mean, and it just explains, like, if people are like, oh, why would he go to Russia if he wasn't in bed with Russia? Well, like you said, it's the only safe place he can go before, escaping to where he really wanted to go, which was Latin America.
But it was a temporary transit. He was actually only going to be there for a very short time, remain in the transit zone. It's like you do in any international airport. You got transit zones which allow you to, without even stepping off into quote unquote the sovereign, territory of that nation, you remain in the airport, and then you just go on to your next flight.
All right,
It's just a lot of fog. You got it. The historical is like you can genuflect automatically. Some genuflect automatically when Russia bad, Snowden bad. Oh, Snowden's in Russia. He's even badder. That's just kind of a simplistic way to look at it. What's he supposed to do? He's stuck. He's stuck. Multiple attempts to seek asylum, or at least temporary, in another country, and it just didn't work out, right? So he got temporary residency, and then he ended up getting permanent, right? They accepted the asylum. Remember, that's also supposed to be internationally recognized, right? Sure, it wasn't when Assange got unsummarily yanked out of the Ecuadorian embassy some years later. But so he's stuck there. But what do you do? Then you got to create a life. He knew. Let's just say it this way. He saw what happened to me and a number of others. He knew, given the nature and the scope and scale of what he was bringing out, and to journalists. Remember, he never released anything to anybody else except to selected journalists. He knew that by doing that he was putting his life on the line, or at a minimum, he would end up in a maximum security prison for many, many years, if not the rest of his life.
Yeah, and what's funny to me is you still have that smear that he, he's this Putin buddy or whatever, and, ignoring that he planned to go to Latin America. And the fact that they downed the Ecuadorian president's plane because they thought he was on it proves that they know damn well he had no intention to stay in Russia. He wanted to be in Latin America.
Yeah, that's another iron twist on this. Yeah. Why, if that's the case and he was just going to stay in Russia, then why did they force Morales' plane down, believing that he was harboring a fugitive, quote unquote, a fugitive?
All
Well,
right.
technically, he is a fugitive in the eyes of the U.S. I'll say injustice system,
Huh.
because they in essence had issued charges against him.
All right, let's get back to the hearing. There's a lot to correct here.
You even called Edward Snowden, and I quote here, a brave whistleblower. Every member of this committee supports the rights of legal whistleblowers.
All right, Tom.
Yeah, I could go on for quite a while. Legal whistleblowers. Yeah, that's another interesting thing. So it's like, I guess they get to define what a whistleblower is. And if they don't, if it's illegal disclosure / unauthorized leaking, then they're not legal. That means they're not a whistleblower. I ran into that myself.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you were a legal whistleblower. Then they framed you.
Remember, I went through every channel that existed, literally multiple times. Okay, over multiple years. I was with Congress. DOD. Before that, the Inspector General, the Office of General Counsel, my own bosses, including the final whistleblowing NSA that I actually did was with then General Keith Alexander. Didn't go over very well.
Yeah,
that was in November 2005. I did make a fateful decision, and I knew it was fraught with extraordinary peril. I knew that. I was no naivete at all. When I went to touch the third rail, go to the press. But here's the kicker. Going to the press is not criminal. Going to the press does not violate national security. It was assumed I did, right? Actually, NSA, unauthorized contact with the press is at that time was an administrative violation. That's all. But I understood. I knew the government goes, oh no, you leaked classified.
But you only went to the press when you already tried the proper channels in congressional oversight, right? Well, let's rewind a little bit for people who aren't familiar with your story.
Okay.
You are a top senior advisor. What was at the
whole time
administrator
I was there,
at the NSA, the National Security Agency.
Yes.
This is the agency
yes.
that Snowden leaked documents showing was spying, doing warrantless spying on everybody, all Americans. So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was at the epigenesis of that program right after 9/11. First day on the job was 9/11. It's a whole story in itself. It's still to this day, 25 years later, anniversary next year, is fresh now as it was then. It's just like it's that moment where life completely altered. There's my life before 9/11, but there's my life after 9/11. It's never been the same since. So, there I was. I'd been hired in from the outside, interestingly enough. I wasn't brought up from within, although I've been a contractor there for a number of years. I reported to the number 3, the director of signals intelligence, the operational mission of NSA. In fact, the entire time I was there, my boss supervisor always reported to the top deck, the civilian head, which is the deputy director. That's how senior I was. So I got to know a lot of people, a lot of fellow seniors, a whole lot, and I had enterprise accountability, including overseas. So in multiple positions. But I found out to my horror, right after 9/11, the failure to keep people out of harm's way resulted in the NSA being designated the executive agent on the President Bush's President Surveillance Program, the PSP, a super secret mass surveillance regime that extended to the domestic borders and to any U.S. person, stateside or overseas. Now, it is true in the history of NSA, it had carte blanche when it came to foreign intelligence. And up until the scandals and all the revelations in the 70s, and then there was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was still you had to meet the Fourth Amendment when it came to anything else. All that was completely bypassed after 9/11. I was even part of the chain where we'd put information together. It would be put in front through the FBI. They were the ones that would provide the affidavit to the secret FISA court. That was all blown out, just blown away. Well, no, we just need the data. I mean, and then I would say, well, wait a minute. If FISA is not working, if it's no longer meeting the demands of the post 9/11 era, the digital age in particular, then you go back to Congress, because it's Congress, and I'm going to emphasize Congress, right? They're the ones that have the ability to change the law. Now, it's still the president could either veto or sign into law, but it's Congress that actually legislates law through bills. And they said, no, if we go to Congress with what we want to do, they'll say no. You can imagine at that moment, and this is early October, when I confronted the general counsel, who was read in. It was we're talking its own compartment. It literally had its own compartment, which at the time was a highly classified program name, which was unusual that the program name itself was the compartment inside another compartment, which is beyond sensitive compartment information, exceptionally controlled, what's called ECI, not to get too much in the weeds here.
Well, just the core issue is, you have Mark Warner grilling Tulsi Gabbard for not condemning Snowden because he didn't go through the proper channels, that he didn't go through the legal options.
I went to those channels. They were exposure channels. The fact that I would, quote unquote, use the existing internal channels, including at the time they changed it later under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, I could go directly to Congress, which I did several times. Then I was part of official. There was off the record, but then I was essentially subpoenaed with two different investigations. Saxby-Chambliss subcommittee. It was a fairly new committee in Homeland Security, and then the bigger joint 9/11 inquiry, the 9/11 joint inquiry.
So
I provided material evidence, reams and reams of data, and verbal. I mean, we're talking on the record, right?
Yeah,
but it all blew. It all blew back on me. I was fingered. I was tagged. I was targeted even internally before it ever went to the press that I was a dangerous individual inside NSA. I was effectively the digital version, right, of a Benedict Arnold.
For going through the proper channels. This is the result.
But remember, you got to remember though, this was in essence indicting. I say indicting in terms of whistleblowing the highest levels of the government, up to including the president. So you can imagine they're not going to take this lightly. They were using the cover and color of national security, the imprimatur of national security, to bypass existing law and statutes. And remember, there was criminal liability, criminal sanctions for violating FISA at that time. Oh, I guess we're not violating, we're bypassing it. Of course, later, they started passing ex post facto laws to legalize what was patently unlawful and unconstitutional, which in itself is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. It's still surreal to me. It really is. But yeah, so you can imagine, remember, Snowden comes along years later and he's seeing all this, right? All of this. It's like, why would I want to? If I'm going to, quote unquote, blow the lid off of the much fuller metastasization of what I had blown the whistle on early on, right after 9/11, I'm going to have to go directly to the journalists. I can't go through the channels because he saw what happened to me and the other whistleblowers. So I want to get back to the hearing, right? Tulsi Gabbard refused to call Snowden a traitor. Now, this is an interesting thing because I was labeled enemy of the state. I was called worse than a spy by the chief prosecutor before the judge because what I had done was worse than a spy because spies give up secrets in secret. I was giving up secrets to the public, which means everybody got to see it. Oh, wow. So it was a crime. See, that becomes a crime against the state for having dared expose the government wrongdoing and violations of law. Well,
yeah. Yep.
Okay.
For exposing crimes, they try to frame you with a crime.
It's not as simple as much as certain senators want to simply make it black and white and make that their, but remember, performative test. Traitor. If not a traitor, then I got serious concerns about whether or not you should be the DNI. So I understand. I'll say sympathetic with Tulsi refusing to call Snowden a traitor, and here's why, because I think it's really critical for your viewing audience. Her stance actually reflects a more nuanced understanding of what is arguably and I'll accept myself a very complex role that Snowden played in exposing unconstitutional government actions while simultaneously breaking the law. Are there laws, especially executive orders in particular, which gets into like the nuance, when you take, which is clearly classified, different from my case, but clearly classified, and have it published through, in this case, journalists? Yeah, you can make that argument. And I think, and I'm just going to say, I believe that her position was an attempt to balance her acknowledgement of the legal violations, which I think is more accurate than breaking the law, with the undeniable public value of the information that he revealed. But see, being nuanced in this space is like, can't be nuanced. So it also reflects, to her credit, a refusal to label Snowden a traitor, because it stems from a recognition that there's a much bigger picture here. Oh, I guess they don't have time for the bigger picture. She's consistently acknowledged, as I said, that he broke the law in terms of how information is handled. But she emphasized that the disclosures, and this is where it gets complex, because it did expose, there's no question about that, egregious, illegal, unconstitutional surveillance programs, the full metastasization, at least as of 2013, that I had blown the whistle on. But remember, I was treated in a very similar fashion. So these revelations did lead to reforms. It's important to note that. And even, the government wanted unconstrained 702. Let's go, Section 702 of the FISA. That did lead to some constraints, including, people forget this, the passage of the USA Freedom Act in 2015. That curtailed certain mass data collection practices where essentially had been unrestricted. I'll just say unrestricted up to that point. So to call Snowden a traitor, or attempting to get her to say he's a traitor just to salve the political performative issues of certain senators, that ignores the broader context. And then guess what it does? It reduces his actions to a simplistic narrative that doesn't capture their complexity. So her approach reflects an understanding of whistleblowing as a moral and ethical act when legal channels, disclosure channels like I followed, fail. So she pointed out that there were established procedures, but she acknowledged quite implicitly, that's clear from her testimony, that those disclosure channels and the processes behind them often fail. I'll say pretty much fail most of the time to protect individuals. So it aligns with my own experience as a whistleblower, where the internal channels proved completely ineffective. And in fact, in the use of those, it triggered all kinds of retaliatory measures that were quite severe, and I'll even say swift. So her reluctance stems from all those, I'll say, loaded implications. Because, see, this is what's critical for your viewing audience, to call someone a traitor. See, by definition, if you actually look it up, he didn't commit treason. They didn't even charge him with that. That's another part of the Espionage Act. He wasn't charged with that. But Snowden's actions were really motivated, as were mine, to inform the public about government overreach and violating the law. And so as someone who has faced accusations of betrayal for standing up for what? What are we standing up for? It's constitutional principles, the Fourth Amendment. I understand, though, how this label can be easily used, a label traitor, to weaponize and discredit legitimate dissent. Remember, she also wants to move forward. I'm giving her credit here in the hearing. They just didn't want to hear it. In fact, if you remember, I listened to it very carefully. She was interrupted a number of times. They would not let her. At one point, she's talking over. She can be very strong. She can stand her ground, but they wouldn't let her emphasize that. We need to prevent future. I agree. There's no question about that. I get there was all kinds of stuff put into place after the Snowden disclosures, right? Insider threat programs that were extraordinarily extensive. But But see, the other, what's the nuance? The nuance, this is a both and. Okay, it's not either or, it's a both and. She wants to reform whistleblower protections, and she wants to ensure that the legal avenues are there and protected when you are reporting misconduct. That's what they're there for. That's a forward-leaning or looking approach. And it signals her intent, to her credit, to address systemic issues instead of just gratuitously dwelling on past controversies. The government doesn't get to decide who the whistleblower is. They tried to do that in my case. They didn't even want testimony to demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt. They didn't want any of that entered into the record as evidence or First Amendment or anything dealing with classification. Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
So it demonstrates her integrity. It demonstrates her commitment to nuance, an environment that I will argue too often, but this is intelligence. Intelligence is an art and science. It's not perfect. It doesn't say, yeah, it's this and that, just absolutely. There are no, rarely do you get absolutes, right, in the intelligence space. But this environment, as you saw in the committee hearings, often demands black and white answers, and that's what they were like. They just wanted that answer. So it's not an easy stance to take, especially with the extraordinary political pressure. And there is no question in my mind that behind the scenes, they're doing everything they can to disrail certain individuals, certain agencies do not want her as the DNI.
So you talk about how Mark Warner and the rest of the committee, they wanted no nuance.
Nope, no nuance at all.
And my God, they cut her off so many times. Just Mark Warner alone here, I counted at least 3 or 4 times. Let's see.
You even called Edward Snowden, and I quote here, a brave whistleblower. Every member of this committee supports the rights of legal whistleblowers.
All right, if you just rewind, you see how much bullshit, how that was total bullshit.
Well, I got something to say about that.
Go ahead.
I do. I know how quickly the government moves to vilify whistleblowers, period. When I exposed, and they were unconstitutional, those secret surveillance programs, and besides 9/11 intelligence failures, besides massive fraud, waste, and abuse, guess what I was accused of endangering? National security. Even though my actions were aimed at protecting the Constitution, as if the Constitution means anything anymore. As I was told back in October, just, Tom, you don't understand. It's quaint, can't keep up with the times. Historical document, get on with it. Really? Jeez. That same playbook was used against Snowden. By refusing to call him a traitor, she was signaling she was not willing to perpetuate the narrative without considering the full scope of what his actual disclosures achieved. Even Obama admitted, as reluctantly as he wanted to, he admitted in public that it caused all kinds of conversations and meetings, and maybe we did overreach. Maybe we need to pull back a little because we are America, right? We're supposed to be different, right? It did force. This is the kick. See, this is the whistleblowers, the canary in the coal mine. It did. There's no question. Mine was more stateside. There was some international press, but it really went full blown with Snowden. That's why there was a period there where everybody and their brother wanted to interview me because so few people knew about all this in the background. And then people are saying, "Oh, wait a minute! Didn't you blow the whistle some years ago?" And Mark Klein and a number of others, yes, but we didn't do what Snowden did, which was bringing out highly classified information. That was a difference, and a lot of people are biased. If it's not on paper, if it's not in a document, then it didn't happen. So don't have proof. And they'll go with the government narrative. It's much harder to do that, as Snowden well knew, given the history here. It sparked public debates, it sparked legal challenges, even international reforms. But to miss all of that out of hand and brand him a traitor would have been intellectually dishonest, I believe, on her part. Now, her stance suggests she does see Snowden not as betraying, even though that's what I endured. Oh, you betrayed your country. You took an oath. Wait. Non-disclosure agreement is not an oath. Snowden took non-disclosure agreements. They're not oaths. The non-disclosure agreement in itself, based on the executive order that governs it, does not allow the use of a non-disclosure agreement to be used as cover for breaking the law or for covering embarrassment or administrative failure. It doesn't allow for that. It's actually clear in the executive order.
Yeah, so you violate a non-disclosure, but you're upholding the oath you took to defend the Constitution, and yet they flip it as if you're violating Constitution. You're doing the exact opposite, or that you're breaking the law. You're doing the exact opposite.
Maybe, and I've said this publicly, I'll say it a little bit differently. There might be a relationship between how far the government is willing to go after you and the degree to which the disclosure touches a huge nerve or several.
Yeah.
So
I'm amazed.
Remember, breaking the law doesn't equate to betraying your country.
I am amazed that like they're still so touchy about it. Like,
hyper, because it's the one place you've got bipartisanship.
Yeah, wild. Yeah. At the beginning of the hearing,
yes.
Tom Cotton gave Mark Warner some of his minutes. That's never happened before. Even Mark Warner acknowledged that. That is so disturbing and kind of depressing. That is the one thing that there's bipartisanship over, and that is that you need to come down hard on and smear the hell out of and villainize truth tellers, whistleblowers who are exposing government corruption and government abuse.
Well, there's another distinction. Focus on the messenger, caricaturize them, defame them, character assassination, go after them, spread rumors, innuendo, and that way you get to cover and provide a smoke screen for the actual message, the disclosure itself. That's the thing you don't want anybody to really notice. So part of the distinction here is that many in positions of power, as you saw in the committee, fail, or I will say refuse to make that concession. I'll use that word loosely, because guess what? It challenges their authority or exposes systemic failures or violations that they themselves are responsible for, especially in that committee in terms of oversight.
Yeah. But
which I call undersight now.
Another wild thing, though, is like, isn't there a history of the intelligence communities abusing their spying powers to spy on the oversight?
Yes.
Committee of Congressional. I mean, that's
the whole torture program.
Yeah. That's incredible.
We still don't know. We have an executive summary. We don't have the full report. It was buried. And CIA under Brennan was actually literally spying on Congress.
On these guys, on the Mark Warners. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
They must have some serious dirt on them or something. I mean, what?
They're co-opted because they're. You have to remember that set of committee members from both parties are privy to a lot of secrets.
Mm-hmm.
The secret, that thing with secrets. Oh, I get to know things. I'm inside this special sacred world with priests and priestesses, and there's this altar, and you bow down before it. And it's called national security. There are secrets worth keeping. Ellsberg himself has said that. There are, but there aren't too many of them.
And then I guess, you know what? They don't even need to have dirt. The intelligence community doesn't even need to have dirt. They're just, the reason the Mark Warners and the Tom Cottons, maybe not them specifically, but generally speaking, it's because they know damn well that the same smears that they're issuing right now that were leveled against Snowden, you, and anybody who tries to expose the apparatus, the spy machine, that those are going to be directed at them, because there's no real basis for all. It's basically just lies and distorted truths. And it's just so easily leveled against anybody, and it's going to be directed right at them if they express the same moral compass that Tulsi has in her career.
Well, here is something. So this is a perfect segue for me to then comment on this, because this is often not mentioned, discussed. The convenience of black and white labels can have on future whistleblowers, not just existing ones or going back in the past, right? And, oh, yeah, it's traitor. It's so easy to simply say any individual who exposes government wrongdoing, think about this, and then just say they're a traitor. Why? Because it sends a clear message that dissent will not be tolerated, no matter how justified or necessary it is. And guess what it creates? A culture of fear, a culture of silence, be seen, not heard within government institutions that are supposed to be providing for the common defense, to include national security. It's precisely the opposite of what democracy demands and requires of us. So in refusing to call Snowden a traitor, she's positioning herself, and you're not going to hear this. I died nothing anywhere close to this, because they've labeled her as well. Okay.
Yeah.
But in refusing to call him a traitor, she positioned herself as someone willing to wrestle with difficult questions rather than simply defaulting to easy answers. She's acknowledging the tension that clearly exists between national security and individual rights. We know tension existed since the foundation of the country, between legal obligations and moral imperatives. And it's that kind of thinking. You can call it nuance, but it's that kind of thinking that is so rare in politics, especially when it comes to issues as polarizing as whistleblowing and surveillance. I mean, think about it. So her stance, I have to say, resonated deeply with me, because it reflects an understanding of what whistleblowers like me, and in this case, Snowden, have faced. We didn't act out of malice. We did not act out of disloyalty. We didn't act out because we were willful betrayers. We acted out of a profound commitment to the principles the country was founded on. So in refusing to condemn Snowden, just to reemphasize this, Tulsi Gabbard demonstrates respect. You want to hear that? For those principles and the incredibly difficult choices, even life-altering choices, that whistleblowers like myself and Snowden are often forced to make. And in the end, by the way, her position is not about Snowden. It's not just about Snowden. You know what it's about? It's the kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a nation that values accountability? Do we want to be a nation that holds power? Remember, with great power. Remember the Spider-Man movie? With great power comes great. Well, it can also exercise great irresponsibility. That's the other side of the same coin. We want to silence people like Snowden who dare speak out against abuses of power. I think she believes in the former, and in that I commend her. I have to say it. I commend her.
And so, I mean, I hope they confirm her. Now, everybody just watch. You could just see what Tom was just talking about. Just watch any effort of Tulsi to offer nuance. Watch how quickly Mark Warner tries to shut it down.
But Edward Snowden isn't a whistleblower. And in this case, I'm a lot closer to the chairman's words, where he said Snowden is, quote, an egotistical serial liar and traitor who, quote, deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. Gabbard, a simple yes or no question. Do you still think Edward Snowden is brave?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Edward Snowden broke the law. I do not agree with or support with all of the information and intelligence that he released, nor the way in which he did it. There would have been opportunities for him to come to you on this committee or seek out the IG to release that information. The fact is, he also...
Sorry, I have to pause it. That's not necessarily true, right? Although the way she frames it is like there would have been, right? She didn't say there was, so I don't know, but
that's her being nuanced herself. Yeah. But I will be the first to tell you, and I realize I'm a bit cynical given my experience. I provided prima facie evidence. This was not second, third hand. Remember, you can blow the whistle because you have a reasonable belief that something is not right. I actually knew it. I provided that to key people with access on the committee, staffers, et cetera, and plus the formal investigations, prima facie, all buried. I remember the people, well, where is it all? All they have is a record that I was interviewed from the 9/11 joint inquiry. Where's the data? Where's all the material, the material evidence? Oh, you have to talk to the Senate archivist. They go to the Senate archivist. Oh, that's at the NARA.
Wow.
Really? No one can find it. I also know this. This is interesting. Apparently, because this came through the then co-chair, that what I provided the joint inquiry was so sensitive that it couldn't even be in the classified report. What does that tell you? Because the government was violating the Fourth Amendment willfully as a executive act of commission without any restrictions.
So, even as he broke the law, released information that exposed egregious, illegal, and unconstitutional programs that are happening within our government.
Excuse me,
that led to serious reform.
No nuances allowed. No nuances allowed.
That Congress undertook.
Chairman, we got 5 minutes. So I take your answer, and these are your quotes. Brave, please join my bipartisan legislation calling for charges to be dropped against him. Do you disagree that legislation was not appropriate? Do you believe he is brave or not?
Yeah,
back those words?
Once again, Senator, Edward Snowden broke the law. He also released information.
We agree that
doesn't let her get a word in.
Edward Snowden
that exposed the United States government's illegal
your
programs.
Legislation and your words
are
amazing, and it keeps going. It keeps going.
Briefs.
Then what does it say? Because this is the huge denial. This is the elephant in the room when it comes to all of this. What happens if it's power itself, the highest level of power in the U.S. government, is breaking the law? Just doesn't matter.
And these are the same
how
people.
dare you call them out? How dare you call them out? Because then that's a crime. That's a crime that you are committing against the state because you're calling out state crimes.
Yeah.
See, it sets up, to me, it sets up a toxic, it really does. This begins to infect the body politic. And when this goes on for long enough, guess what? We have two governments. That's part of, you say deep state is way overused. I don't like using it anymore. But the secret side of government has been increasingly used as a cover, as a foil, for lots of executive action and other activities that are without, in some cases, years and years or decades, without the public ever knowing or only getting hints at it. Just better to operate in secret because you don't have to be held to account. If anything, if you're in secret, you have a higher level of obligation, a higher obligation in terms of the oath you took to support and defend the Constitution, to faithfully execute the law of the land, than if you're not secret. Because you're in secret, no one can really see you, right? It's secret. So you have a higher obligation.
Let's see if Mark Warner lets Tulsi Gabbard mention that Snowden exposed illegal government activity. Let's see if she lets if he lets her say that one time without being interrupted.
Okay.
I'm making myself very clear. Edward Snowden broke the law. He released information about the United States government's
I've got
illegal activities. If I may just finish my thoughts, Senator. In this role that I've been nominated for, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will be responsible for protecting our nation's secrets. And I have 4 immediate steps that I would take to prevent another Snowden-like leak.
Ma'am, I would simply ask you again.
So I'm curious, what would prevent another Snowden-like leak?
A simple answer? You want a simple answer for me?
Sure.
Don't break the law.
Yeah.
Don't break the law and then use national security to cover it up. It's always the cover up is always worse than the crime, quote unquote. Crime can be pretty bad. But remember, the cover up in essence saying we don't want to be held to account and we have the power. This is the catch-22, the Joseph Heller novel, right? We have the power. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? We have it. You don't.
So Tulsi's got a 4-point plan to prevent new Snowden leakers. Tom's got just one. Just a one-step plan.
Right.
Don't break
Sure
the
do.
law. Don't violate the Constitution.
Right. Simple.
Do you believe he is brave or not?
Yeah,
Back those words?
once again, Senator, Edward Snowden broke the law. He
Mr. Gabbard,
also
I'm not
released
talking-
information
we agree that Edward Snowden
that
broke the
exposed
law.
the United
I'm
States
asking you a
government's
question whether
illegal
your
programs.
legislation, I don't think you're going to answer. I agree with Tom Cotton. He's a traitor. You, for years, until you got chosen by President Trump, have celebrated this guy as brave. You've called for him to be pardoned, for his charges to be dropped. I cannot imagine a director of national intelligence that would say that kind of behavior is okay.
I mean, that is scary. He can't even imagine, like, somebody upholding the Constitution as director of
That's the
national
kicker
intelligence.
for me. That's all we were doing.
Yeah.
Snowden
Yeah.
has made it crystal clear. I myself, I was honoring my oath. I would have violated my oath otherwise.
We've literally got to the point where the Oversight Committee can't even imagine
Nope.
a director of national security that doesn't support illegally spying on Americans, on every American, and collecting everyone's data unconstitutionally.
Partly
Can't even
because they're
imagine
paying-
that.
Yep, can't even imagine it. But see, partly in part, and this is what's happened, is the normalization of this. Remember, it was huge when the story first broke in public in middle of December of 2005. It was huge. Bush and company and the national security establishment was apoplectic with the leak of that super secret. Remember, this program was one of the most closely held secrets in the nation and had been, I mean, even in the history of establishment national security since the 1947 National Security Act. Apoplectic.
Let's hear what else, how this ends. I forget.
How would we maintain the trust of the IC and the contractors who work for it? How would we
What the, oh, hold on. Okay.
maintain the trust of our Five Eye partners?
Who does he not worry about maintaining the trust of? Of the regular Americans, the actual American people.
No, people don't matter.
What a way to end that session.
I know. No, it's stunning. I just wish more Americans who, I mean, part of this, it's in DC, it's inside a secret committee hearing that's having a public hearing because a president, newly inaugurated, has placed his nominees into position. And they're being asked questions. And though they can have a closed session, this is an open session. And it's one of the rare times with this type of committee, it's even a rare time with even the other committees, where you actually get to see what's really going on, in part, you know, even beyond the performative politics, what really matters.
So there you go, everyone. I mean, that was, our government is still calling Edward Snowden a traitor, lying about him being Putin's puppet and all this, saying he should have gone through the proper channels. Tom Drake showed us what happens when you go through the proper channels. Thomas Drake, thanks for spending extra time with us.
Sure.
And I'll let you have a great rest of the evening.
Yep, you too. Take care.